So, the register guns like cars point. I know many people that when they put that out there, they say like. So, I know that from the onset that a true equivalency is not really in play, but I try to explain to people as best I can without being snide or indirectly implying that that hypothetical was not put out rhetorically. So I simply evaluate that point, taking them at the very extreme point of them being just truthful and honest in their position, instead of just getting caught back and forth in, tit for tat goofiness without just simply going through the processes of being honest. So when I hear individuals say, register guns like cars, the first thing I would say honestly is, if we're going to put forth a true equivalency, I got my 2-year-old out here, so there will be background noises and distractions. So if you put a true equivalency of that into practice, I would tell you honestly to be careful what you wish for, or not what most people, but what some people would. It would be counterintuitive, as far as when you hear many people requiring or wanting more stringent legislation. I'd say be very, very careful what you wish for. But when you go to get a car, you don't need to have a license to buy one. You don't need to have a background check to buy one. Now, I'm not opposed to background checks for the purchase of firearms, because I will acknowledge that the purpose of a car, as far as versus the purpose of a firearm, is to inflict a certain level of lethality, but for the purposes of good as well as bad. So I see that as a reasonable filter to keep people with bad backgrounds. Now, we can have other topics of conversation over mental illness adjudication, domestic violence, violent felonies. I'm of the personal opinion that if you do not commit a violent act, is that really a felony, and should that even negate your Second Amendment rights? But that's another topic. I digress for a second. But sticking to the registered guns like cars, and sticking to a true equivalency, but not to put in place that's exactly what you're implying, but just simply having the thought process so you can adjust your point to what you really have inside your own head. And so you don't need to have a license to own a car. You don't need to have insurance to own a car. You only have to have a license and insurance to drive the car in public domain. Meaning, now there could be differences in state jurisdictions. There could be differences and nuances state to state, but I know in the state of Arkansas, that where I reside, that to the best of my knowledge, that I can just go to a car dealership or a private party and buy a vehicle if I'm paying cash outright, not financing. Now, financiers will want you to have insurance, so they finance the loan, but that is a risk measurement to safeguard their financial investment. So if I'm going to a car dealership and I'm paying cash, I'm paying outright, I go out, I buy the car, and as long as I put it on a trailer and then take it to private property, I don't need to have a license or insurance to drive it on my own private property. I don't have to. I can literally that day go out and smash it into a tree and do with it what I will. However, you need insurance, you need a certain amount of training, per se licensing, if I'm going to be taking this vehicle out into the public areas on a consistent basis. So therefore, if we were to use a true equivalency of registered guns like cars and have them perform like cars, it would only apply to firearms that are going to be for daily carry. meaning if I'm going to conceal carry or open carry, if we really want to get to brass tacks. But I'm an advocate of open carry. I have a concealed carry permit. I advocate for training. I am certainly a staunch 2A advocate. And so that's why I tell many people that are wanting more legislation. I don't want to necessarily say anti-gunners, but that is somewhat of a the pejorative that is put out there. I'm guilty of it. I'm human. But I would say be careful what you wish for. Because if you put into place a gun registration program to the true equivalency of like cars, you're going to make a proliferation unseen. Meaning, well-intentioned, but good people, for the most part, having the means and not only the constitutional right, arguably, but the means of carrying any and everywhere that they wish. Now, let's make true equivalency. May need concealed carriers insurance and stuff like that. Now that can get down a rabbit hole of another discussion, but I won't go down that hole as yet. I'm all about having a good conversation with people. But I'd say be careful what you wish for. Because that's what the true equivalency would be. Meaning if I go to a gun store and I just put it in a bag and I take it in my car and I just bring it home, and the only time I'm ever going to mess with it is in my privacy of my own home, or take it to a range outside of, like on private property, and just shoot it recreationally, no insurance or no registration needed. But even the registration thing, that shooter in Las Vegas, one of the rifles was purchased in California. California requires registration. Registration, even in the context of cars, does nothing to prevent awful, heinous, evil acts. It only shows proof of legal ownership and able to track down who has what car, when, and where. And that's in the context of firearms, where there's the abstract reference to them in terms of the culture, and the gun culture in the American, in our history, puts a whole different perspective on it. Ask the Jews in 1930s Germany. They called for a registration first, and then they took them, and then we know what happened next. Would that happen here? Very doubtful. That was there, that was then, this is us, this is now. So I'm talking about the methodology, not the feasibility of, people coming for us. But I'd say be careful about wanting that equivalency. I would say refine your argument and really think critically about what a gun registration would actually do, other than simply make a track record of who owns what gun, and rightly so. Now, if the culture behind firearms were different, meaning that at the drop of a tragedy that you don't have these puke politicians whinging and crying for legislation, and before the blood is even dried, let alone cold, they have bills ready to put out there, kind of like the whole phrase, never let a good tragedy go to waste. If the culture was different, meaning that when you had a mass shooter, like in Vegas, if the culture was responding to about the dude, what's wrong with the dude, what's wrong with the guy, what's wrong with the person that did this, rather than the tools of implementation that he used. There could be the component of that conversation, like, when you have a drunk driver that careens into a school bus or something, or a family of 5. Culturally, where is the prioritization on worrying about what vehicle the person was driving? Because emotionally and culturally, we just don't react to it, to the car, to the vessel that was part of the tragedy that was played out, because it was the person that did it. And even though cars aren't meant to be dangerous things, there's far more deaths. And in Nice, France, was even used outright to be very, very deadly. Even more deadly than Las Vegas. So I would hope people would think a lot more critically. I try to. And the last thing I always want to do is just be snide and just sniff my nose at people. But with that, I got to go. My little man just stubbed his toe. I think he's crying. So, time to do dad stuff. Take it easy. See ya. Bye.